Hi, it's Georgia Raisman. I'm on Front Up this morning with Linda Williams. Many of you know Linda Williams, and for those of you who do not, Linda's a longtime Nantucketer who has served the town in many capacities, on the Historic District Commission, on the Zoning Board of Appeals. But today
Planning board.
And the Planning Board, oh, of course. And today what I'm asking her to talk about is 40B, because Section 40B of Mass General Laws has to do with making affordable housing on Nantucket, creating an incentive for developers to build housing on Nantucket that is affordable. And it's a statute that we fight with and deal with on a regular basis, and right now we're dealing with it in the context of an application called Surfside Crossing. So I'd like Linda to talk about the origins of 40B, what the structurally 40B is like, and how we can deal with it in the context of the current plan that's in front of the ZBA.
Well, it's a statewide law, and I don't think people realize how old it is. It was actually enacted in 1969, so it's been around almost 50 years.
And the intent was to...
Well, what the state legislature passed, it was called the anti-snob zoning law.
Wow.
Because a lot of towns who were beginning to adopt zoning, we didn't adopt zoning in Nantucket until 1972. A lot of towns that were beginning to adopt zoning, and they were zoning out undesirables, different racial components, different economic components. So it was called an anti-snob law at the state legislature. Technically called that, which some people don't really realize about that. It was used around Boston and some of the bigger areas initially because the smaller towns took a while to catch up to adopting zoning. There's only been one major overhaul. In 2008, there was a comprehensive revision on the regulations and guidelines, but the basic premise didn't change. The 25%, 80% of median. Nantucket, that's different than, let's say, 80% of median in Ware, Massachusetts.
You mean median income?
Yeah, for particular family sizes, it's all based on federal and state guidelines. We don't create who's affordable and who isn't affordable here.
Oh, we don't. So that's interesting. So the statute says that if a developer creates a development that has 25% of its buildings or units, let's say, 25% of its units available for sale to people who make an income in a range that's a federally determined income range, or
the HUD sets the
Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah, sets the ratios. DHCD at the state approves what you're doing. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of components to this. It's not like, okay, I wake up tomorrow on Nantucket and you're 80% or you're not 80%. It comes from on high, way above our pay grade. They did try to get rid of it in 2010.
Get rid of what?
Statewide.
The entire law?
Yeah, attempted to vote it out, and it failed by a super majority.
Wow.
Because they realized it was a critical issue all over the state, not just on Nantucket, which is, waterlocked.
Right.
It's more difficult for us. You can't live in the next town and commute.
Right.
Though if you're down there at the 4:30 High Line, you think everybody's commuting.
Right, there are people commuting.
But the law, actually, this is an interesting factoid. The law has created, up to the beginning of this year, I think, 58,000 units of housing for 80% or less statewide for those in need.
For people making 80%
or less, yeah.
Or less
that includes seniors, veterans, families that are income restricted. So it's kind of interesting.
Of what?
Of the HUD set income guidelines.
Oh,
you can find those. I think we've got them posted on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund website, what they are at the moment. They're readjusted on a regular basis as to, when we first came into this, I think the cap on a resale or a sale of an affordable unit was 450 or somewhere in the low 400s, high 300s. You can get now up to 695, I believe, is the cost of an affordable unit, up to 150% of median. We have a local covenant here, which we went to the state legislature to get special legislation, which is why Sachem's Path has 80% up to 150%, all covenant restricted in perpetuity.
Okay, you're getting me a little bit confused, so I can't imagine that I'm the only one. The way 40B works for any particular development is that a developer comes in, buys a parcel of land, says I'm going to put up X units on it, of which 25% will be affordable by people making
80% or less.
80% or less of what?
Median income.
Of median income.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Which is established away from us. Median.
Okay. And then that's the first 25%.
Yes.
Then above that 25%, is there any regulation? So
It's a
above
free-for-all.
that 25%, the developer could put in anything they wanted.
Anything they wanted.
Okay.
In this particular case, to
In
bring it
Surfside Crossing.
back to Surfside Crossing,
Okay.
it's my understanding that the developer is proposing to limit another 25 to 50% of these units
Mhm.
at the middle income, shall we say. People who make too much to qualify for an 80% or a covenant house.
Mhm.
But they don't make enough to buy $1 million home. So I believe the range is between 450 and 700,000, whether it's a freestanding unit or whether it's one of the apartment, condo units or
Mhm.
whatever they want to call them.
I see.
So there's going to be an opportunity for that middle income group that's left out of the covenant, the 80% or less,
Right.
that's left out of the market because the median income here, the median price for a
Prices
house is like
is-
over 2 million, I
Yeah.
think, something ridiculous.
Yeah.
So there's a real need for that group.
Wow.
Single
Okay, I didn't
person
know that. I
households,
didn't know
all
that.
kinds of things.
So 25% is going to be available for what we normally think of as affordable housing, people
Yes.
making up to 80% of the median income.
Yeah.
Another 25 is for people making what we would think of as middle income.
Middle income.
And then 50% is going to be available for
50% or
market
more
fif-
market rate.
Yeah, up to market rate.
Now, how 40B works is that market rate units subsidize the other units. Because if you're charging $280,000 for an affordable unit, 80% or less,
You're not
you
making
can't
any
build
money
it for
on that.
anything less than 700,000, or if it's a freestanding unit.
Right.
So the market rates, that's why they set it up from the very beginning. Market rates, you get to increase density in order to have more market rates in order to subsidize the 25%. That calculation has not changed from the beginning,
Mhm.
as far as I know, even with the overhaul.
Mhm.
So
So the
people think
intent-
they're making money.
Mhm.
The cap is also, I believe, 20% of, there's a massive amount of limitations on what you can make money on as a developer.
Mhm.
And I believe the cap on actual profit is 20% on a development. But there's limitations on what you can charge for marketing. There's limitations on what you can charge for hardscape. There's all kinds of limitations. It's a very complicated formula.
And these are in the statute or in
Yes,
the
they're in the
regulations?
statutes and the
Wow,
regulations.
wow.
So unless you sort of get a headache and sit there in a dark room with a focus right on the act,
Mhm.
there's so many parts of this act that any developer has to jump through so many hoops in that act
Mhm.
that they're not making scads and scads of money as if they were coming in making a traditional subdivision.
Mhm. Hmm.
So people think it's greed and everything else. I've heard the word trickery used online. There's no trickery involved. The law is the law. It allows what it allows, and that's what we have to work with.
So the way it works in point of fact is the developer comes in with a plan, like Surfside Crossing is an original
Or Beach
plan.
Plum or Sachem's or any of
Sachem's.
those.
But the one in front of us right now is that's inciting such indignation is Surfside Crossing, and it is allowed under the statute to waive a series of local regulations that it would normally have to address. Correct. So and it goes before one board, the zoning board,
yes.
instead of other local boards, and that one board receives reports from the other local boards
Yes.
and absorbs those reports plus public input
Yep.
and then addresses the developer with its own
Concerns.
concerns.
Yes. And then the developer then goes back and remasters it. Traditionally, all 40Bs around the state, the developer will come and ask for way over what their threshold is that they know they're going to get.
Because they know
Because
it's a
then they know
process
they
of
can
negotiation,
negotiate
is that
down
right?
and
Mhm.
negotiate down. We're not going to see 156 units unless it goes to appeal, which is another subject.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
But the ZBA became the super permitting authority in 1969 because most towns didn't have planning boards.
I see.
Most towns didn't have zoning. Most towns didn't have HDCs. A lot of towns didn't have CONCOMs, conservation commissions.
Mhm.
So the only thing that when they were putting this zoning law into place, is they put it in for people that are adopting zoning. If we had never adopted zoning in 1972, we could do whatever we want with this
Well,
thing.
how curious is that?
So
what
most
how
everybody
ironic.
had zoning by 72.
How ironic. Wow.
So that's why it was given to the ZBA and not to the planning board, who
I
was
see.
more equipped to deal
Yeah,
with
I
these
see.
large subdivisions, because the ZBA doesn't see those normally,
Mhm.
which is why the law also provided that all these other entities, I think there's 17 in total, at least the last one I did there was,
Wow.
have to respond. The water company, the police department, the fire department, the sewer department now,
Really?
the DPW, the selectmen.
Whoa.
There are a number of entities that need to, the HDC will review them and make the recommendations. My experience with the ZBA was 25 years as staff and 16 as a member, was that the ZBA generally adopts what everybody weighs in on.
Right.
They don't
Rather
go
than
off on their
rethinking,
own,
right,
yes,
rather than
because they don't
rethinking
have
or
the
s-
expertise in
Right.
Concom, HDC,
Right.
and planning board,
Right,
you know,
to
the various
substitute
other
their own
entities.
judgment, yeah.
Yes, they tend not to do that with 40Bs because they're so overwhelmed with the whole process.
Right.
Then they have the peer reviews coming back by hopefully the 20th of August,
Mm-hmm.
and the next meeting is the 28th of August at 4:30, I believe, at the
Yeah.
high school.
Yeah.
And they're setting all the media up and everything else. So that's one more shot for all of us to have our concerns on the table before they go back and readjust it, and then come back with something closer to what they think is going to meet everybody's concern, hopefully with reduced density and less access points and a lighting plan that doesn't violate the dark skies and
Well, before
and
we
all
get
that
to their
stuff.
particular plan, the last thing I wanted to talk about with 40B, or the other element I want to talk about with 42, is there can be friendly 40Bs.
Yes, you and I talked about that.
Hostile 40Bs, but
Yeah.
friendly 40Bs are less likely now that the town itself, and you gave me an example of a friendly 40B as Satcham's Path.
Yeah.
But they're less likely now that there are fewer larger parcels available for that purpose. If you wanted to create a friendly 40B, if somebody who had 4 acres, I mean not 40 acres, 4 acres or 6 acres, wanted to create a friendly 40B, how would that happen?
The friendly 40Bs, it's just terminology. Is that the community can support a project like Satcham's Path. It is called a local initiative program. It had broad support from the selectmen, from the people in town. Obviously, the housing authority, we owned the property outright, and
So
we
it has
gave
to
it
be
to
a
them.
nonprofit entity that starts it then, probably.
Not necessarily, but it's
Because, as you said, it's expensive to build these things.
Expensive
so
to
you're
build
not gonna
these
do it
things.
if there's no profit motive involved.
well, Hack didn't make a whole big profit because the housing authority gave them the land, which obviously allowed them to have all 40 units being
Right.
covenant. The CPC, we gave them, because I'm on that, we gave them a couple $1 million for the infrastructure, and we took out a bond.
The community preservation.
Yeah, which we were paying off over 10 years
Right.
to finish the infrastructure and get it so all the units could be affordable. So there was a good public-private partnership between the Housing Authority, the CPC, and Housing Assistance Corp.,
Right.
who built it. That's a friendly 40B. There was broad support.
Right.
A hostile 40B, as you know, like this one, is adversarial. Then they have to go get site approval. Mass Housing has to come down here, approve the site, go around the selectmen, go around everybody else. And that's really the difference. They just have to jump through sort of another hoop and bring Mass Housing down here. Mass Housing doesn't have to come down to do the site
Friendly one.
on a friendly, more than likely.
And what is this, what are safe harbors? And how does that
Safe
operate?
harbor, I've always been confused by that one, but safe harbor is, let's see, somebody gave me the right language for that one. It's, if you produce 24 units of affordable housing, 80% or less, in a calendar year, you're safe from being subjected to a random 40B for another year. If you produce 48 units, you're safe for 2 years. It just gives you a breathing point. Had they not,
So it allows the town to breathing
Step
point
back.
from hostile
Yes,
40Bs.
from
So
40B,
it allows
from
the
any
town to kind
40B.
of create its own affordable housing.
yeah,
On its own terms,
or
basically.
not, as the case may be. Had they not litigated 6 fairgrounds, all 64 of those units would have counted towards the shy list, the 80% or less, because they were all rental. Richmond was also litigated and stopped. They had multiple units out there that would have counted towards the shy list. Neither one of them are going forward at the moment because they're both stuck in court, leaving us wide open again for any 40B to come in the door. Let's say Richmond had been done, 6 fairgrounds had been done, and the 156 units had been done from this project. We would still be under safe harbor. What we're waiting for right now is the 2020 census. Or we would be under 10%, but we'd get the safe harbor. The 2020 census is expected to reduce the number under the 10%.
Oh,
So it would be a little easier for us to get to that 10%. but we have to sit and wait for the census. And then whatever that number is established in 2020 is held as our 10% number for 10 years until they do the next census. So there's a lot of factors at play here.
And I
But
gather,
right now, we're not in safe harbor.
whenever new buildings are built, that changes. So safe harbor is a moving target. Isn't that right?
No,
If there's
that
new
number is,
construction?
the safe harbor is 24 and 48 until we have the next census. And
Oh.
the 10% number is set because of the last census.
Oh, I see.
So that
I
does, the
see.
10% doesn't move
Oh,
until
I
you
see.
get the
so
next
that's
census.
misapprehension then. At least I was under that misapprehension that the 10% changed with the number of housing units actually available.
No,
It's not. Oh, that's interesting.
it's, you gotta get
Okay.
to that 400 and whatever that number is,
Number is,
425 or whatever that number is. And what's interesting is that only year-round houses are counted for 10%, not the summer homes. So that 10% number is based on year-round housing units, not total housing units. We'd never get there if it was total housing units.
Wow.
So it's only the year-round housing stock that is counted, that 10% number is based on, which is why we're waiting for the 2020 census
Huh.
to see
What the
how
year-round-
year-round
year-round-
population,
I
how year-round
see.
households are.
I see. Huh. So then in terms of process, if a developer returns with a modification and for some reason or other the town still does not want to accept that modified plan, there is what
Well, the
happens at
town
that
is the
point?
ZBA
The
only.
ZBA. The ZBA, that's what I mean.
We don't get a vote in this. We
Yeah.
get a voice,
Right.
but we don't get a vote.
Right.
What's the next step?
What's the next step?
Well, if there are two things that can happen, and this is where they've got to get a grip here. There's a real threat to losing everything to this development. If the ZBA denies it outright, they have to support that denial. And there's certain language. If they denied it, was that denial reasonable and consistent with local needs? The hack has sided with the developer almost every single time.
So reasonable and consistent with local needs. In
Needs.
other words, the ZBA would have to say, we're denying it for reasons that have to do with local needs and prove that,
It's
prove that to
reasonable
be
and consistent.
reasonable.
Now, here's the problem. If you don't have 10% already, they're not going to
They
side with us.
don't think it's reasonable no matter what.
That's right.
So
So
the-
here's the other thing, though. In the case of the application where they put on so many conditions and made it so difficult, like they want 156 and here you can have 10, that's
Right,
extreme, but
right.
that they make it uneconomic because you can't support the affordables with anything that's market rate. That the developer is going to appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee. That's the name of it. Housing Appeals Committee. It's not a court, it's not a commission, it's
a
Housing
committee.
Appeals Committee. I
Wow.
don't know why it's called that,
Whoa.
because it's acting as a quasi-judicial board.
Right, right.
So they will look at it and figure out if the conditions were unreasonable and make it uneconomic, and they will side with them. Now, in both scenarios, whether the applicant appeals the denial or they appeal because it's uneconomic, the conditions that have been imposed, the HAC has the right to eliminate all conditions, to boost it back up to a much larger number. We would have no say in that, basically. We can go up and testify, our attorney can testify. But basically, they will go with the developer. And we could lose all of the concessions that we won at the ZBA level. And they can start whacking away at all the conditions that we
Do they
that we
modify or
preferred.
do they just say yes or no?
No, they can modify.
They can also
It
modify.
depends on what the issue is that was appealed up there. Because I believe the Housing Authority had to appeal something back in 1984 was that was our first 40B at the Housing Authority. We have two sections, a federal and a state. So there are actually two 40Bs there. Two 40B applications and approvals over there. We had to appeal something, I think, up to the state and we won. But it was some niggly-piggly thing.
So, so if we were to lose at the Housing Appeals Committee level, then we would take the Housing Appeals Committee to court.
I believe it goes to the
beyond that.
SJC. I don't believe it goes to Superior Court. And I don't think it goes to Land Court. I think it goes to the next level
Next
up.
level up. So
Which is
it's a
expensive.
long, expensive proposition.
And courts don't necessarily, if everything was reasoned and considered all the way through the process, whether it was a denial that they didn't feel was reasoned, or whether it was too many conditions, they will, if the HAC, they will generally support HAC. So we have to be very measured and reasonable in whatever concessions we can get to make it look the best, because if it goes on appeal, we have to be able to support why that condition was
So
put on there.
the issues that you think are strongest in discussing how this particular application ought to be dealt with, the issues that you think are strongest would be what? I mean, from my perspective, it's public safety. It's this fire
That's already been
access
cleared.
issue.
What people don't get is that the state building and fire codes are not exempt by 40B. That's health and safety. The multifamily units have to be fully sprinkled, have to have fire exit, have to meet extensive fire code requirements like any apartment
Yeah.
building would. Also be hydrants all over the development. Single-family homes are indistinguishable from other developments like Nashawquisset
Right.
and North same density, just so they can get an idea of the density.
Right.
The turning radiuses have already been provided to meet the fire truck access, and they cannot cut corners on any health and safety issues. So it will have to meet the standards set by the fire and police department. That's the end of that story. They can't get around it. There are no waivers from it. They
And
have to do
are they
it.
met? I mean, that's the allegations are being made that they are.
As far as I
so
know,
far.
they're being met or they're readjusting it, because they have to take some units out in order to get the turning radiuses, and they have to make the roads wider to get the turning
And then the
radiuses.
issue of the single access to Surfside is not sufficient, doesn't rise to the level of a safety concern?
To me, it does, being back there behind it. It is the largest year-round population that's serviced by one access. And that has always concerned me. It concerned me when I was on the board of Sherburne Commons. It concerned me when we were objecting to Abrams Quarry density. They do have a breakaway fence going through Sherburne Commons. Unfortunately, right at the moment, this property doesn't have another way out. It's all coming out on South Shore Road. I must say that all the dire doom and gloom predictions of Abrams Quarry and Sherburne Commons about not ever getting out of the Badlands on South Shore Road never materialized.
But they're significantly smaller.
I never wait. Even when I was taking the kids to school, I was getting through that intersection. It was everybody else out there on the intersection, the other three sides. It had nothing to do with me. We were able to get out. Even in the summer when everybody's zooming down there with their surfboards down to the end of the road. It's like a straight mile shot. You can hear them at night, drag racing. It hasn't materialized. If the density is reduced to a manageable level, and there's more green space, and there's more of a setback from the road, and maybe the green space is up front and not in the middle, so we're looking at the apartment buildings. And the apartment buildings are reduced, and density is reduced overall. It may spread the traffic out, especially if he's marketing to seasonal people. Those people aren't here in the winter when our kids are going to school. So again, that is a natural reduction in how many cars are coming out.
You're suggesting reasonable conditions on, that
Absolutely.
might make this doable.
Green space, setbacks, reduction in density, dark skies meeting low lights, parking area, parking, give me the parking. Abrams Quarry suffers for no yards and not enough parking. So everybody's parking in those little dirt roads that they're not supposed to park in. The kids are playing in the road. There's a basketball hoop that was in the road because the kids have no yards. They need places to play. They need a community center. They need where the homeowner association can meet. They need a playground. They need a field. They need more green space to give some air and light in between this thing, so it doesn't look like some sort of an urban New Jersey, where
Right.
I'm from, New
Right.
Jersey subdivision.
So
there's all kinds of things.
There's another misapprehension that I didn't think was a misapprehension floating around about infrastructure. People have been saying that the developer under 40B is allowed to offload all of the infrastructure costs onto the town, and therefore
No.
our tax costs are going to be higher because of this.
No.
Is that not true?
It's absolutely not true.
How does that happen? Where
And I
is it?
wrote that down to myself. There's been a lot of argument about that. With any large subdivision at the planning board, the developer has to pay, putting their water in, fixing the sewer, doing their own roads, fixing if there's any damage to South Shore roads, the
40B
bike
doesn't
paths.
exempt them from that?
No,
So I wonder where that came
I don't
from.
know what they're talking about, because everybody who's in there also has to pay the sewer connection fee, unless the developer pays it, and the water connection fee. And they all pay taxes. What people forget is that we're under Prop 2.5. How far can those taxes go without an override? They're banging up against 2.5. And what they also don't get is that every time a housing unit is added that pays, homeowners taxes, property taxes, that lowers your taxes or it keeps them the same, because you can't go above 2.5 without an override or debt exclusion or whatever they want to call these things. So over time, my taxes have pretty much stayed the same, except for the override adjustments per thousand, or it's gone down. Because the more houses that are built, banging up against that 2.5, the more
people to pay that number.
They pay that number. And a new house, a $2 million house or whatever it is, costs like $6,000 minimum a year in taxes. So mine's going to go down like $10 or whatever it is, or stay the same. They have to provide their own water. They have to run it to the site themselves. They have to pay for that. They have to pay for however they're going to deal with the sewer. They have to pay for however they're dealing with the drainage, whether it's offloaded at certain hours. They have to pay for everything involved with that thing. As far as I know, they haven't asked to get out of any of that. So this is another scare tactic.
Well, I'm glad that we're dealing with all that, because the whole, it seems to me the only way to really address the problems that are real problems with this development is to be rational about what
we can get. Yes.
And the risks that we run by both polarizing the community and polarizing the situation unnecessarily. I think we have to, and also by not understanding the risks that we get by just saying no to everything, to the point that
absolutely, that we look like the anti-snob zoning comes back into play.
Yeah, and
my concern is that I have Sachem's Path, which is a 40B. We have two 40Bs over there at Housing Authority. We have Abrams Quarry back in the Badlands. I was on the Surfside Area Planning Work Group that did the area plan. You know, Matticat has one, Sconset has one, and we clearly identified in there that we've taken our hit for the entire community, because all the housing Nantucket stuff is in the Surfside area.
Well, I think we have to make it. I think we have to make it clear that it's not a not in my backyard.
Right.
It
has nothing to do with
it. Because the island needs affordable housing, and nobody would say the island doesn't need or want affordable housing.
Right.
It's the scale, and it's how to deal with the scale and how to modify it in a way that we can get behind. And hopefully spare all of the risks of an appeal.
And scale
is possible.
Scale is very. It was shocking for me, and I knew Barbara Malcolm. They from Montclair. I was in class with a couple of her kids, and I knew the property was there. I've known it was there all along. I've been in the Badlands since 1983. I've known it was there. I knew it was going to come up for sale. Various parties tried to buy it before the group bought it.
That's the other misapprehension, that it was somehow or other could have been bought by the land bank.
We tried.
Or somebody
There
else
was a proposal, a tentative reaching out before it was bought that September, and they were going in that direction. It was too far down the road for us to actually get involved. But that doesn't preclude the land bank or CPC or anybody else from getting involved as this moves forward.
Well, let's hope that is what happens, and hope that we can all deal with this on a rational basis and pull together to make the most emphatic community point that we can, at a point that we can still be heard and still be
and have our concerns addressed. I mean, we need to be reasonable and not screaming, not yelling, not putting things that are not true on these signs,
no, but on the
not
other hand,
whipping people into a frenzy.
But on the other hand, Linda, getting the community as involved as it is has been a really good thing.
It's good.
It's been a long time that we've gotten this done. So thank you so much. I really think it's important to get what we can and can't do out there to the public, and that's a huge public service, and which you're always willing to do, and I really appreciate.
Slings and arrows. But I'm a housing advocate. Let's face it. I've been on the Housing Authority for years. I was an original member of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I was on the planning board.
Well, that's why you are the perfect person to talk about.
Do I think 40B is a great law? No, I don't. I think at this point, 50 years later, I think somebody needs to sit down and take a really hard look at it and see what it is that can be adjusted, maybe by community, maybe what the particulars of an island, us in the vineyard, the Cape, then you come over the canal.
Right.
This is a whole different world than Newton or Wellesley or Springfield.
That would be an ideal situation, maybe away from this particular development to try to address.
And we've spoken to Julian Sear about it. I had him meet with some of us, a small group of us last month.
We would have a working group working on that.
Yes, and that was the suggestion that, sort of, they may never buy it because they may go back to Nantucket's wealthy and there's nobody can live there and all this stuff. But that's not really the case. We have limited resources. We have limited land, and the cost of land here is higher than anywhere else.
And we need affordable housing.
Then we need affordable housing, and that necessitates market rate in order to subsidize those 25%.
Right. Right,
So-
but a unique approach to how to handle it.
There are better ways. We can be a really good 40B like Sachem's.
Right,
It can be like a couple of others.
but it doesn't have to be a disaster.
No, but what we need to do is get together, be reasoned, be intelligent, express our concerns, especially those of us who live in the Badlands, not somebody from Tuckernuck or Muskegon, but those of us who are actually directly impacted by this,
You
not
don't want
this
the you don't want
generalized
the
thing.
in-play of the seals.
No,
Thank you, Linda.
but you know,
It's
that
been-
kind of
it's been-
stuff.
It's been great.
Make your voice heard, but do it quietly.
Thank
and do
you.
it concisely.
Thank you.